Hey there guys, welcome to this video about A2F design theory process. So this is going to be a slightly more planned video than I usually do. This was more work, so I'm probably not going to do too many of these. I'm going to be totally honest. I prefer rambling into a microphone for an hour. But this is a kind of design theory that I came up with. I am a little bit hesitant to say that I came up with it because I feel like statistically speaking, somebody else has probably taught something very similar. But regardless, within my little bubble of people I know, I haven't heard anybody explicitly discuss the idea that I'm about to explain to everybody. So in my contained bubble, I came up with this. If you are in the comments and you're watching this video, and as it goes on and on, you're like, oh, I made a Gumroad about that like 3 years ago. Feel free to tell me. You can, I don't know, put it in the comments if you want. But again, I think this is something I've come up with, but again, I'm hesitant to say it. So before I get into talking about explicitly what A2F is, I just want to do a little preamble. This is some of my work. From over the years. Some of it is professional work, some of it is personal work. But because of the work that I've produced over the years, I've had quite a lot of students come to me for exclusively design tutoring and mentorships. I think there are plenty of people out there who are better, but people do continue to come to me, which I feel very lucky to be able to do. I feel it's great to be able to teach people and like help them improve. But I think one of the reasons that people do come to me and ask for design advice is because within my portfolio, I have a pretty varied range of designs, but they are also varied in terms of the shapes, the iconography, and the visuals of them, if that makes sense. So I'm not the kind of guy who has like one consistent form language he uses or shape language. I'm often, even within a project, massively shifting it from, one design to another. So this is something that I do in all of my work, and it's something that, as a result of the teaching, I've had to explain how to do to a lot of my students. So it's something that I've had quite a lot of time to think about because it's been such a common question. So let's kind of get into this. What actually is A2F? Well, A2F stands for abstract to functional. This is one of the design processes I've developed for my students so that they can design things more easily. And I think it's also important to say here that this is not a theory, okay? So I would call like big, medium, small a design theory, or 70-30 a design theory. This is more of a design process. So it's a methodology that should help you apply the design theories you might already know, if that makes sense. So let's just jump into this because I think the sooner we start talking about the specifics, the sooner we will understand what's going on. And to start off, I just want to put this here. I'm going to design a dropship. That's kind of vaguely what I'm going to be doing over this video. I think this is called the LSAT. It's from Attack of the Clones and Star Wars, which I'm sure everybody's watched. Great, maybe not the best Star Wars film, but the designs are really cool. And I'm going to do a dropship because I think it's a fun, easy-ish design that is present in massive amounts of sci-fi media. So it's a very common design. It's something that, you could reasonably, I think, on a lot of TV shows or movies be asked to design, or video games. So this is my brief. I'm going to, by the end of this little tutorial, have a dropship to show you. I'm not going to draw it live because I hate drawing things live when there's a recording happening. I've already prepared it. I know what it looks like. You'll find out what it looks like. You could skip to the end of the video if you want, but that would be cheating. But that's the goal for me. I'm going to use my A2F process, the abstract functional process, to design something like a dropship. So let's start off with looking at the functional elements. The easiest way to find the function or the functional elements of any design that you are going to be doing is to find a real world equivalent. So if you're designing a dropship, look at a helicopter or a VTOL craft. These are often used as troop carrier transports. I'm specifically looking at military helicopters because they have that nice sliding door on the side, just like our LSAT. So that makes it cooler, because we can see the troops inside and we can watch them jump out. It's more cinematic. I am aware, by the way, that the diagram on the right-hand side is of a totally different helicopter, but I think it's a good example to show that like you can find a lot of really detailed and interesting information about aircrafts, vehicles, or really anything, because the internet is full of amazing information that can help you without you really having to have a deep understanding of how things work. So this is a great little diagram. It shows me, all these things that I might want to include from a functional point of view in my dropship design. And if you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, I want to design something that has no real world equivalent, I would encourage you to really, really kind of be a little bit out there when you're thinking about stuff. I've had people ask me like, okay, well, how do I find a real world equivalent for my spaceship? Well, number one, we do have things that are, similar to spaceships, like, the actual spaceships that we have going into space. So you could look at stuff by SpaceX. You could look at the Blue Origin that Amazon created. You could look at any of NASA's stuff. You could look at any of the Cold War Soviet era rocket designs. And if you're going, okay, well, actually, none of those designs are big enough. I'm going to design something that's really, really big. Okay, well, go look at a cruise ship. Go look at a giant military aircraft carrier. Go look at a cargo ship. All of these things are unfathomably large, and you can scale them up quite easily, I feel, or scale them down. But again, they're going to give you lots of interesting design details from the real world that will be very kind of like cool to reapply and rethink in a new design. Now, I'm just going to say this as well. You can definitely make stuff up. You can put anti-gravity pads on. I mean, I guess anti-gravity pads do exist in real life as well because we have maglev trains. You could also put laser guns on. I guess those also do exist. But my point is, you can add things that are a little bit more fantastical as functional elements if you want. If that's part of your design, that's totally okay. A great example of that would be like a speeder bike, right? A speeder bike doesn't actually have a real decent functional world equivalent besides a motorbike. A motorbike is just a speeder bike with wheels. So it's okay to add in functions which are imaginative or totally different to things that we have in the real world. But again, I still think you can usually find a real world equivalent to pretty much anything that you are designing. It's very hard to design something that is truly, truly unique. It's always going to be partially based off of something that you've seen or experienced in real life. So once you've done that, you can start to list out the functional elements that you want your design to include. So for example, for my dropship, I want engines with a VTOL capability. I want a pilot's cockpit. I want a gunner's cockpit. I want a sensor turret, landing gear, defensive weaponry, a radar dome, and a door that can open for troops. Great. These inclusions are very important. They help you add realism to your design and also detail, which is great. But they also give you parameters for it, okay? And this is super important because here's a question. Is a dropship without being able to drop troops into a war zone? Now, that might seem a little bit silly. So I'm going to go on a little caveat here to explain why I'm even saying this. I don't know if any of you guys ever studied philosophy out there, but maybe if you did, you're familiar with this kind of pretty basic philosophical problem called the ship of Theseus. And trust me, this will become slowly more relevant, hopefully, to the design theory we're talking about. So just to go off on my little tangent here, imagine that the boat of the Greek hero Theseus is found. It's thousands of years old and it's been damaged, but it's undeniably the original ship that he sailed across the ancient kingdoms with. If you replace one plank of that ship, is it still the same ship? If you replace every plank of the ship, but it looks identical to how it originally was, is that still the same ship? Well, if you replace one, we have changed a certain amount of it, right? We have changed one piece of the old material for a piece of a new material. If you replace every plank, but it looks exactly the same, well, it looks exactly the same, but again, it's made out of totally different stuff. So at least in the context of what we're talking about, and that's why I bring it up, there kind of has to be an inflection point, at least in your opinion or the opinion of the viewer, where one thing becomes another. How many pieces of wood do you have to replace in this ship before it tips over into being a different ship instead of Theseus's? So bringing this back to what we've done here, the parameters that you set with these kind of like functional design things that you want to include, these will help you actually design the dropship. They are elements, that are like the planks of wood that make up the ship of Theseus. You have to use your better judgment to decide what can be replaced and what cannot. In a design that you create, some planks are less important than others, and it's your taste and intention that really dictates this. The one thing that I always like to warn people, right, is that a car designer can very quickly end up designing a motorbike if they just remove 2 wheels. So there are some things in a design that if you remove them, you fundamentally change it in such a way that you are no longer designing the thing that you were intending to design. Another easy example, I guess, would be if you took a plane and you cut off the wings and added rotors on top, it's become a helicopter. Or even if it hasn't become a helicopter, it will definitely look like a helicopter to a normal audience member, even if you have some super cool functionality that technically still makes it a plane. People will understand it as being a helicopter. So these functional elements will be very important for guiding your full design process, because again, they're going to help you set the boundaries for what is and isn't the thing that you're creating. So all of this is the functional part of A2F, but what about the abstract part? Well, the abstract bit refers to the more artistic part of this process. So I'm talking a lot more about the shapes, the details, the proportions, the style, etc., 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 blah, blah, blah. The abstract is, in my opinion, what makes your design more like concept art than a piece of imaginary engineering. So if you never do any interesting shape design, you are essentially creating something that could be real. And I think whilst there's definitely a place for that in concept art, the majority of concept art is asking for you to design something that is new and somewhat entertaining. So if I take this gun as a basic example, you can kind of apply this process by abstracting a real reference. So this is, I don't even know what gun that is. I'm not even going to pretend that I know what gun it is, but I've drawn over it here to kind of make it look a little bit more sci-fi and different. And what's important to say here is that I'm essentially just adding appealing shapes, and then I'm actually finding functional reasons for those shapes afterwards. So if I just click back here, this shape here has replaced what I think is the safety. If anybody tells me differently, fair enough. But I've replaced that with like a little finger guard, so the person can scan their finger there and it unlocks the trigger. I've added this big shape here, and I've added it as a little front grip, probably super uncomfortable to shoot, but oh well. And I've also added this shape up here, which honestly serves no functional purpose besides changing the silhouette of the gun. And it's also okay to add stuff, even if it is not 100% functional. Again, we're not necessarily designing things for real life. We're designing stuff for entertainment. So if the brief is to just make something that looks a little bit cooler than a normal gun, you can absolutely add some weird, crazy shapes that don't have a massive purpose to them, but still make it look different and add general appeal to the design. So again, let's just go here. There we go. So yeah, just to harp on this for 1 second more, but even if you include a random shape, it is generally better if you can find some kind of excuse for it to be there. And I think the other thing to mention is, if you do add in a shape like this, make sure it doesn't interrupt any of the existing functionality that's important to retain and keep. Let's go on here. So yeah, I think personally that the abstraction phase is what makes our designs concept art in some respects. So this is how you can take a design and you can push it beyond something that's purely functional. I think that a lot of people tend to forget that the audience for your art is, at the end of the day, a normal person in a way. It's not necessarily another artist, right? If you're working on a film or on a video game, the person who is going to be consuming your work is just a normal layperson. It's not there might be other concept artists out there who go like, oh man, this is super cool the way this guy did it. But most of the people consuming it are just going to be normal people. So how you balance this process of abstract functional is largely what will actually dictate how realistic your design is. The more abstract you go, the more stylized it becomes, and the more functional, the more realistic it becomes. So this is a very abstract gun from Ratchet & Clank. It's still definitely a gun, but it's quite silly. It's got very cartoonish proportions. This gun is from Call of Duty. Very low res image I'm noticing now, but oh well. And this is obviously a very realistic gun. This is essentially a legally recreated version of the gun. So my understanding is for COD games, they literally take the guns, they go through like, they change just enough to be able to legally put it in the game. So that's what's happened here. And of course, then you have stuff like this from the creator by Jeremy Hanna. And this is somewhere in between, right? It still has a lot of the elements of a realistic, cool, functional gun, but it also has a bunch of shapes that have been pushed and changed to make something that's a little bit more interesting. And all of these things can be entertaining in their own contexts. Whatever it is that you're designing, I think you will always need a little bit of abstraction and a little bit of functionality, no matter which end of this scale you are trying to design for. But, my personal taste is something like in the middle, where it's has like a little bit more cool shape language accompanied by a little bit more interesting functionality. But that doesn't mean that the other options aren't entertaining. You can push that slider as much as you want, one way or the other, and it's totally valid. This really just comes down to your taste, right? And what appeals to you and the kind of games, projects, and films that you explicitly want to work on. So let's return to our dropship. We've talked about all of this stuff. How do you actually implement it? Well, the first step is just to start. So you can begin with a full attempt, a purely functional version, or a purely abstract version. So I'm just going to draw with my mouse here. So I'm very sorry for how bad this is about to be. But what I mean by this is, if you were to draw a purely functional version, it would probably look like the most realistic possible version of your design. So this is, besides the robot legs and some of the exaggerated proportions, not far off of that. I pretty much just traced over a real helicopter to get 90% of these shapes, and I added some real VTOL engines on the side here, and I stuck some very ugly legs at the bottom. But you could go for a totally abstract version as well. A totally abstract version, this, is what I think a lot of people call silhouette design, right? So when you're designing I'm going to do this so badly, I'm sorry, but when you're designing a totally blank silhouette with nothing inside it, look at that. Now that's one hell of a VTOL engine aircraft. Look at that, awesome. But when you're doing something like this and you're doing, I've heard people refer to it as shape carving and a bunch of other things. When you're doing this, you are doing a 100% abstract version of your design. You are purely looking at the shapes and the shape language. So this is also valid. It's not how I like to start, but you can also do this. Or you can, like I said, do a full attempt, which is going to be somewhere in between. So where you're trying to think about having appealing shapes, but also trying to have the functional elements included. I think that's probably the best place for people to start, but I wanted to include these other options just in case. So what do you do after this? Well, this is, like I said, our somewhat bordering on more functional version of this design, where I've just traced over a bunch of real world stuff. So let's go into abstraction to start pushing it. So this is my very abstracted version. So again, I've kept a lot of the same functionality. I've got rid of the helicopter blades on top of the VTOL. I guess not the VTOL blades, I guess you would call them. So I've shortened these down into much chunkier, kind of like sci-fi looking engine designs. I've shortened the butt of this vehicle. I've given it some more sci-fi looking legs that I think look cool. I've kept the same door, and I've massively changed the shape over here of the cockpit to push it. Now, again, I'm not spending a lot of time necessarily on these examples when I'm doing them, but what I want to really emphasize here is that I am somewhat thinking about the function, right? I'm trying to retain a lot of the function that I already had, but I'm mainly just going out there and trying new stuff. I'm thinking, okay, how can I adjust the shape of this to create an appealing silhouette and shape breakup, and not worrying too much about the functionality, because the next stage of this would be to go back to the function. So I can take my design here and I can start laying into it. So maybe I think, okay, I like this shape, but for the military purpose that I want to use this thing for, I want it to be a little bit more aggressive and boxy, and maybe that would also make it stronger in a firefight or something. So let's do that. There we go. There is our new cockpit. It's much boxier. I've added like a very vaguely drawn rim to it. I think this would be more functional, right? I've added some joints to the legs. So before the legs were just these straight things. Well, I don't think that would work very well. So I've added some little joints here so that they can fold up and down and move. So maybe when it's in flight, the legs go up, and when it tries to land, the legs come down and adjust to the terrain. I've looked at the gun here. Well, I don't necessarily hate this silhouette, but this gun can't move. It cannot, rotate or do anything. So I've added it on like a little swivel here. And I've also added, again, just imagine I've drawn that area much better, but I've started to maybe add in the inference of like more realistic parts of the gun, the function of the gun, right? So maybe I'm adding in the muzzle brake or some of the ammo cylinders or anything else. This area here, the open door, well, there's no door there in the previous design, right? So let's add in the door. Let's add in some seating inside for the troops to sit down on. Let's add some vents up here in places that I think are appropriate. Let's put a little bit more design and detail into these VTOL engines. Maybe we can add a pivot point that runs through the engine. I don't know if that's functionally possible, but who cares? I'm talking about the function. I don't know if that's functionally possible. I think it looks functional. That's all I really care about at the end of the day. So let's add a pivot point here so that these things can rotate. Let's add some flaps to the bottom of the engine. Let's put back in the air intake here, blah, blah, blah. And of course, after this, if you're still not happy with the design, you can go back to abstracting it and you can just go out there and do something really weird. So here I've gone and done some really blobby space octopus version of my dropship. And again, just thinking about what could be cool shapes and what could be appealing from a design perspective. And then I would go back in after this and I would add the functionality back in 100% and try to bring it back to reality a little bit. So this is the iterative cycle that I'm kind of trying to set up here and that I'm trying to explain. In short, if you understand, again, some wonderful drawing here, if you understand what abstraction is, then you can understand what functionality is, and you can rotate between these things to get a nice design in the middle as part of this iterative process. Now, just at the end here, the reason that I think this process is useful is because a lot of people, especially students, tend to hyper-focus on one kind of like part of the design or the other. They either hyper-focus on the abstract section or on the functional section, and that's not good. You have to understand that you need to flow between these things. So if you struggle to retain the shape design stuff and the functionality stuff in your head, this process is very much for you because it's going to help you separate out those two things and turn it into more of a process where you cycle between iterations which use each one. If it's helpful, like I said at the start, you can definitely use this process where I'm drawing over the top of the designs. But again, hopefully this becomes kind of part of your mental arithmetic when you're designing, and you can just do all of this inside of your head rather than having to draw a bunch of silly octopuses onto your screen. Just to end here, this is the one that I designed earlier. So this is my little dropship design, having gone through this process, and you can see, hopefully, that this is a kind of semi-interesting. I'm just saying that because it's my art, again, people can roast me in the comments if they like, but this is hopefully a semi-interesting design which covers this idea of a dropship. We have all of the functions, or certainly a lot of the functions that I discussed at the start, and it's all clearly laid out with an interesting blend of what I hope looks like function versus the abstract shapes that make it cool and vaguely interesting. So, final thoughts on this is just that, this is hopefully a novel process for you guys to use so that you can introduce this into your general thought process when you're designing, and it will hopefully, fingers crossed, allow you to design things more efficiently and more consistently as well, because just as big, medium, small, or 70-30 gives you kind of like this thought process to fall back on, so too, I'm hoping, does abstract to functional give you something to fall back on here. So if you're ever struggling and you're going, oh man, I don't know how to make this look cooler, you can think about this video and you go, oh, you know what, I'm going to do an abstract pass over my design. I'm just going to start thinking about the shapes again. And the opposite end of stuff, if you're ever sitting in front of your design and you're going, oh fuck, this is like has no function, it's just totally stylized nonsense shapes, you can think back to this video and go, hey, it's time to do a functional pass. Or even think, hey, did I ever even write down the functions / the parameters of this design that make this what it is? So I hope this has been a somewhat interesting video. It's, I guess, slightly different to the other ones, but I am not going to be consistent. I refuse to do it. So like I said, I hope this was fun. I hope it's useful. If you have any questions about this process, put them down in the comments and I'll try and get back to you whenever I can. So yeah, thank you so much. Oh, one last thing before I finish. I recently just opened a Discord server with my friend Ruben Lane called Sketchpit. So that will be linked below. So if you want to get feedback or interact with other artists, it's a really fun community, lots of professionals and students in there, all helping each other, interacting. So I thought I would put that out there. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. If you like my work, go check out my Instagram and ArtStation page. And yeah, I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope this has been helpful. Cheers.